Okay, Marcy, and hello. On behalf of YWCA Edmonton staff and board of directors, I want to warmly welcome you to the Power Lunch speaker series. Before I begin, I want to invite our awareness to the land we share with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. First, I would like to acknowledge that participants are joining from Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territory, and Métis Regions 3 and 4, which is home to the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, Inuit, Piikani, Bearspaw, Chiniki, Wesley, and Kainai peoples. The land we share that has been stewarded by Indigenous peoples for time immemorial is an incredible teacher. The duality that Mother Nature holds as both life giver and taker is one we are all too familiar with. As COVID-19 spread, it was our life givers who were at the front lines of this crisis and the most harshly impacted by the resulting economic collapse. In our conversation today, you may find many familiar dualities, such as mother as caregiver and breadwinner. The one thing Mother Nature teaches us is that honoring our duality is the way we begin to understand how to thrive. My name is Nesreen Ali, and I'm the Government Relations Manager for YW Calgary, located in Calgary, also known as Mohkinstsis. And I hail from Six Nations territory in Hamilton, Ontario. Hi, Mom. And I'm humbly a visitor and settler on this land and someone of Amazigh and Berber descent. The YWCAs of Alberta have a long history in our province, beginning in 1907 with the first YWCA opening in Edmonton. Every day, we are hard at work helping vulnerable women, men, children, and families in our community get through this crisis while ensuring a woman's perspective is at every decision-making table during this unprecedented time. The Power Lunch is part of YWCA Edmonton's COVID-19 response plan. While physical distancing rules prohibit us from gathering in person, it's important now more than ever to come together and celebrate amazing Canadian women who are doing incredible things to make our world a better place in this difficult time. Our virtual Power Lunch series, which runs until July 14th, features Canadian women we think you should know and celebrate, including award-winning authors, diplomats, and women's rights activists. Today, our panel is moderated by Jan Damery, Vice President of External Relations and Engagement for YW Calgary. And with that, take it away, Jan.
Jan, can you unmute yourself?
I was unmuted.
There you are right now.
Thank you. Hello, can everybody hear me now? Let's start that again. Apparently we had some technical issues. So welcome everybody. And how many do we have on the call now? About 51 of you. We're excited to have you here with us today. My name is Jan Damery, and I'm sitting in my dining room in Calgary. But you must know that Edmonton is my hometown. And so I'm thrilled to participate in this hosted event by YWCA Edmonton. And it's my distinct pleasure to introduce to you our panelists for this conversation. And we'll start with Catherine O'Neill, who is the CEO of YWCA Edmonton. We have Shannon Hansen, who is CEO of YWCA Lethbridge. And we have Sue Tomney, who is CEO of YW Calgary. Each in their own right are forces of nature. So you can imagine what happens when they come together. And I also want to mention that we are missing one of our colleagues in this gang of four today, and that is Connie McDonald, who's the YWCA in Banff. Her mother is incredibly ill and she is by her side, which is where she needs to be. And we are going to do our best actually to reflect her perspective and know that she is an equal partner in what we actually are putting forth in our submission to the provincial government. We're going to give you a little bit of an overview of what our submission is, and then we're going to open it up to questions because we are interested in what's on your mind. We want to hear how this is resonating with you. And of course, we're hoping to inspire you to join us in this fight. So let's go to the recommendations. This group of 4 YWs, we represent over 30,000 women, children, and families in our province. And we are fueled by a frontline lens when we do this work. And it is through this grounding in the frontline work, in the experiences of both our clients as well as who serve the clients, our frontline workers, that we've put together 6 recommendations as we all start to look to the recovery of our province. And the first recommendation is about childcare. Huge barrier for women participating in our economy. And we've got to get a handle on this. And I think COVID has really shown us how critical this is. And so we'll talk, and we're actually interested in what you think about that. Our second recommendation is really to attract and retain a gender diverse workforce in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or STEM jobs. This is all about encouraging women and those who identify as women to ensure that actually we've got higher paying jobs. Generally what we have found, and I think again the light has been shone during COVID, that women are disproportionately affected by this pandemic, because they are the ones that actually have been laid off, because a lot of the jobs being laid off, and also ironically, those on the front lines, for the most part, are women. We're unapologetic about this. It's evidence-backed, and it's about, as we think about recovery, we want to make sure that women and their families are considered in this recovery. Our third, which speaks to our frontline workers, and I know if Connie was here today, she would passionately make this plea, is that we have frontline workers in professions serving women in domestic violence shelters, those who are serving people with disabilities or experiencing homelessness, and they are grossly underpaid, and they are putting themselves at great risk. And we are huge allies and champions. And I think collectively as a society, we've got to get a grip on this. Our fourth recommendation is centered around encouraging both the federal government to create short-term, in addition to the province, and operational financing and long-term capital plans for our cities. And I know that you're going to hear from Shannon later on, who can really speak to this issue, because it is about how do we provide the services that are needed for our women and families in need. Our next recommendation centers around making Alberta and those coming to this province so that we know that we are safe and an inclusive province. And I think as we've watched the civil unrest, certainly down in the US, and what that spawned even across our own country and province, how important that we are listening and we are aware of the experiences of others who don't feel that they are actually can fully participate in our communities, whether through race and other considerations. Our final proposal is also, we know we as a sector at the front lines, and this is a very challenging time, again, as we live through COVID, and also as we've seen our primary industry, oil and gas, go through tremendous struggles. How do we keep this sector strong? In our 111-year history as 4 YWs, we have seen that we've always been there to help heal, coordinate, and to help community actually recover. And we need a healthy sector to do that, because these are unprecedented and complex times. And with that, these are the challenges, and these are what we see, and encouraging both the provincial government with our help and partnership, how we can actually start to move towards recovery. So I now want to open the floor to questions that you have And of course, I've got a few planted questions that will get the ball rolling about why at this time we have made this submission to provincial government. And it's important that you actually really start to hear from the leaders from our 4 YWs. So with that, Sue, I'm going to throw the first question to you to get us rolling. And I'm going to encourage people, you'll find on your Zoom window box, there are 2 icons, 2 bubble icons where you put your questions and answers. So please start firing questions. I've promised all 3 of these ladies that we're going to put them on the hot seat today and get what they're really thinking about. And I think you're going to be incredibly inspired by both their leadership and also how they're moving things forward in our communities. But Sue, this is an interesting time. And what and why has brought the 4 COs of the YWs in Alberta together to actually do this joint submission? What's the motivation?
Well, thanks, Jan. And it's great to be here. Why now? Well, I think just to make sure that it's set in context, the 4 YWs have done things over the years. If you go back a few decades, they used to do collaborative work, but it was more in the area of fitness. If you go into the 80s, that was kind of what the focus was. And so it's not entirely new for the 4 YWs to work together. This group of CEOs really started getting together last summer to think through how was it that we can work with government in a collaborative way to ensure that there is a women's lens on policy and development and how we could advocate for women, particularly vulnerable women who don't have a voice. And so we started that path, and as I know it's now an overused statement, but there's nothing like a crisis to bring everybody together. And so COVID kind of sealed the deal, really, for all of us. We've gotten to know each other because we've been on calls every single week. And despite the fact that we're not right across from each other, I think if I can speak on behalf of all the CEOs, the collegiateness of all of us now has really solidified. And so why now to make this submission? Particularly now because this is an unprecedented time in Alberta's history. We have been experiencing an economic downturn since 2015, and now you add on COVID, and it's a critical time for this province. And certainly I've grown up in Alberta, and I lived through some of the early 80s, and that was tough in Calgary. This is, again, historic. And so for us to come together, the benefits there is the word collective impact. These are 4 YWs that are across the province. As Jan said, we serve 30,000 vulnerable women and families every year. And we share a joint mission around serving vulnerable women and their families. But what makes the YWs unique is that we are also unique in each of our geographies. So if you're in Lethbridge, that translates differently. Edmonton translates differently. Same with Banff. So while we have a joint mission, what that means in our local communities varies. And so we felt strongly that we were a voice that needed to bring that to the table in one voice to government to make these recommendations, knowing that this pan-Alberta voice recognizes how challenging that can be in a province that can vary greatly from city to town.
Great. Thanks, Sue. Shannon, I wonder if you might just kind of comment also on why now, representing, right, a smaller city in our province, but I also know that between you and Connie and Banff serve also a large rural market.
Absolutely, and why now is very important to think about on many levels and perspectives. And as one of the as probably the biggest small city in Alberta, we face some of the big city challenges, but we also face a lot of small town challenges. And we, like the big cities, also work with a lot of rural communities to be able to support, as does Banff. The reason we need to focus on this now is because we are forever losing our we see small businesses being enveloped in what's going on. We see personal struggles increase. We see people in rural areas having to migrate to bigger centers to be able to afford to live. And by being able to support a good plan fiscally and to have an economic plan, we're able to support people where they choose to be. Right now, people are able to choose, maybe less so than even in the past, but being able to choose their future, being able to choose economic resources and a plan moving forward for their families is really important right now. Another reason we need to focus right now is because we're also looking at a time where things might be a lot leaner in terms of funding in the near future. We know that there are dollars going out for different areas. We are also working within a government that wants to be efficient and to have system planning and to see outcomes, which are all positive, good things. So I believe that we can work together collectively as the YWCAs to be a backbone for the province of Alberta. And by being the backbone for this, it gives us a chance to look at funding coordination at a provincial level, and then also how that impacts each city's individual needs. It gives us a chance to look at potentially having fewer resources. How can we build capacity with what we have? How can we be more efficient? How can we decrease duplication? How do we build strong partnerships within our communities that help us best meet the needs in a more efficient way, because we're not necessarily going to have the resources to go forward the way we have been. And I feel like the YWCAs are poised, and I feel honored and fortunate to be part of this powerful group, and absolutely humbled because it's an amazing opportunity. But I feel like our province benefits from what we get to do. I feel like the YWCAs are poised to be leaders and to actually hold accountable our communities, that we can come to the table and recognize gaps in services, gaps in funding, and represent a person-centered approach in a way that actually helps meet the needs of Albertans. And based on the dynamics of the table here in the YWCA, I feel like we have a good opportunity to be that backbone and to be able to also navigate and support in systems planning across the board so that we have efficiencies and get them not only the most bang for the buck, but also make sure that we're not having gaps in services and we're meeting all of the needs of vulnerable Albertans towards a stronger and healthier economy and stronger and healthier women and stronger and healthier families.
Right. Thanks so much, Shannon. Catherine, I want to give you an opportunity, to warm up, but also I know sitting also in the capital of our province, right? Your perspective on this.
Yeah, why now, I think is a great question to start with, because, you know, when we look not just in Alberta, but across the world, we have seen that women and girls and gender minorities have been disproportionately affected by this pandemic. We're seeing rising rates of gender-based violence, rising rates of unpaid labor, so that's childcare and elder care. And we're also seeing the fact that, you know, as you said in your introduction, Jan, that a lot of the essential workers are women. So the nurses, the caregivers in homes and things like that. So it's essential that governments, businesses, communities take that into account when they're creating a recovery plan. Because we have women and girls and gender minorities have been disproportionately affected, and we can't have a successful plan without taking that into account.
Great, thank you very much. And it worked. We've got a number of questions that have started to roll in. And the first couple actually are on the topic of childcare. And Sue, I'm actually going to get you to take this first one, given that YW Calgary actually operates a 90-child childcare. And the question is from Ricky. What concrete action does the YWCA hope the provincial government will take to support your first recommendation on childcare?
Well, I think the concrete action is to actually assemble the task force that we were looking at, and being able to do that in a way that's reflective of the varieties of childcare across the province, both private and not-for-profit, that they each serve unique populations and each have a unique perspective. And so that task force needs to reflect that. And I think that ultimately out of that task force, in doing so, being able to look at really the three key components around that work, and that is around childcare that is accessible, childcare that is affordable, and childcare that is that's flexible. I mean, now more than ever, as we look at this new virtual world and how we're going to be working and what that means for parents who are looking for quality childcare, there needs to be some flexibility there and understanding what has changed and having a mechanism to actually be able to respond to that real time. We still don't, you mentioned, Jan, we have a 90s childcare facility here in our new hub in Inglewood and Calgary. You know, Lord knows when we're going to get back up to 90, because it's right now we're having to deal with all of the challenges around physical distancing, PPE, and so that's affecting our numbers. It's affecting our ability to serve. And so I think, you know, for us to be able to have a group of childcare folks who can actually talk about what is happening on the ground, what they're seeing, and the ability to pivot, to use an overused term during the pandemic, and be able to shift and make changes real time so that we are actually meeting the needs of the women and families that we're speaking about right now.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just building on that, Catherine, there's another question that asks us, how do we actually see balancing the needs for childcare in our community with the safety of those frontline workers?
Well, and that's why we need a plan, to speak to what Sue was saying, bringing everyone together and really assessing in real time what is happening. There's so many different types of childcare in our province. We have cities and smaller communities, so it's so different in every community. Until you bring the sector together and really get a sense of what's happening, you can't really have a plan, not just for reopening, but the safety and health of the workers that are in these facilities. And this work is so important because it's not babysitting. You know, I think where the Y has done such a good job since 1907 through the years in this intergenerational leadership is that we've always shown that this childcare, quality, affordable childcare, helps build a stronger economy. And those two go hand in hand. If you don't have that sector healthy, half your population might not be back at work. And that's a huge problem. So first and foremost, getting everyone to the table. We're really heartened the fact that the minister has invited us to come and speak to this. And so are taking this seriously, but it's a lot of work and we need to start today.
Right. Thank you for that. And I think we've also really realized through COVID, I mean, many people probably in your circles, those who are on this call with us today, right? Being at home also, right? Someone referred to it as COVID school these days, right? How you balance all of these needs. And we also know disproportionately that it's actually been the women at home actually doing the schooling in addition trying to keep things going. So it just, again, I think puts a really unique lens on this need and how do we get women more fully participating in our economy. Also a reference to partners in this work. And Shannon, I'm wondering if you might help me with a question from Shauna Frederick, which is and who states that she really appreciates the work that YWCA is doing in this space, but is curious, are we partnering or looking to partners as we actually advance this work?
Absolutely, we are looking to partners. In order to do good work in our communities, we can't do it without partners. So part of, in Lethbridge specifically, we have a community well-being and safety strategy that's recently rolled out and is requiring local funding pots to actually list partners, how we're working together and identify gaps. Part of the work I was talking about earlier with the YWCA being a backbone, that doesn't mean that we're doing everything. It means that we're making sure gaps are being filled and making sure that we're working with the resources available to fill those gaps. And I know that I think I can speak for all of us when I say we can't do what we do without partners. Together we make a stronger community, and we can't be experts on every single piece. We are experts on what we do well. We want partners to refer to us, and we want to be able to have strong, knowledgeable, very specifically trained and educated people to support the needs of people. And we're not everything, we can't be, but we can have a strong referral and have a strong communication and education back and forth. And yes, we absolutely have to partner.
Yeah, so well said, right? We talk a lot in Calgary about, right, knowing what our lane is, staying in our lane, but also how do we just sort of expand what's available to all, and just that we're dealing with incredibly complex issues, right, which needs many partners working together, all being in the same boat. I'm going to segue to you, Catherine, on this, talking about the role of women. And I love this question from Kathleen, in that, how are we accounting for the differential impacts on different groups of women? In particular, right, the call to the government to act to address the unique needs of women of color, Indigenous women, and we know that they've also been disproportionate impacts, right, on Indigenous and racialized people, right, of this COVID pandemic.
Well, and that's why just highlighting to the government, again, this disproportionate effect on women, and the fact that when you build out a plan, there has to be everyone at the table. I mean, one thing I'm very proud of with the letter that we sent into the premiers, this council, and also talking to our municipal and federal partners, is that we've strongly recommended that when you're building decision-making bodies, those bodies look like the community they're serving.
Absolutely.
Have better outcomes, smarter outcomes, they look down the road, and they make sure that everyone's at the table. And we're seeing that's going to be, that sets the tone, that helps build the better decision making. So we know, we're 3 months into this crisis, people are moving quickly, and we understand that. And that's why I'm so glad we've raised our hand right now to kind of say, let's take a deep breath, look at how we're even structuring these bodies that are helping making these decisions. So that's a good start. Because if you're looking at your decision-making bodies and they don't look like your community, you need to go back and start again, because you will have better outcomes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so well. And it's something we know, right? And I think it almost just begins with all of us, particularly those of us in leadership roles, looking around the table, whose perspective is missing, right? Becomes really, really critical. Sue, tagging on, there's a question as well about the role of business partners in this work. And how are we helping to educate them on the importance of attracting and retaining gender diverse talent?
So, traditionally, business partners, the sector might have seen them more as the financial partners, right? So it would be looking to them for donations, et cetera. And I think that we've come a long way, particularly as YWs, in being able to reach out and work with corporations on what is it you're seeing in your workplace, for example, that is happening. And with whether it is around racialized women, or what are you experiencing in your workplaces, and finding that common ground in working with the corporate sector. Because there is lots of opportunities, I think, to learn from each other. I come from the corporate world. I've now been in this sector for over a decade, but I draw on it a lot, on sort of what I witnessed there and what I saw. And I can tell you that, in terms of how companies or not-for-profits operate, keeping a team engaged, we share a lot in common that way. And I think that we have opportunities as YWs through our counseling and the different programs in childcare, that we actually make a great partner in what we are seeing, and being able to listen to our corporate partners. What is it that you need? What are you seeing in your workforce? Certainly the stresses of COVID and the anxiety and the mental health that we're witnessing right now, that may be somewhat new for some of the corporate sector. That's been the YW world. We've got a long history in working with individuals, with women and families that have a number of mental health issues. So we actually have some expertise there, whether it's anxiety or some of the other stressors. So I think, like any good conversation, having a diverse background around corporate and not-for-profit, to have those equal voices, I think that there is lots that we can offer each other, and I look forward to doing more of that. And in fact, the Chamber of Commerce was actually a contributor when you talk about partnerships to this submission. We reached out specifically to the Chamber of Commerce because we know that much of what we're talking about here isn't just the women that YW serves. This is an economy that is going to be counting on all women to be able to participate in order for us to get back on track.
Oh, thank you for that. I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit, and I think this next question from Ada sort of reflects, I know you're quite passionate about this, Catherine. How can we be ensured that women get a suitable job after being home for some time, either for being laid off or raising kids?
Education and training and a strategy are a good start.
Getting it to you on a platter.
On a platter, thank you, Jan. Number two is actually a personal favorite of our recommendations, and it deals with the looking at STEM jobs and how, as a province, we can really look at that new economy, that sector of science, engineering, technology, mathematical jobs, and really figuring out how we can get women and gender minorities and girls into this sector and reduce all those barriers into that sector. It's exciting because the potential is unlimitless as long as people start working together today. And we know that sector in Alberta is growing in leaps and bounds, but to get more women, gender diverse folks into that sector, that work has to really be focused, and we need to bring together all sorts of partners to make sure it's working. And I'm glad we've highlighted that, because while it's a very long-term goal, you need that work to start today.
Yeah. And could you also comment, Catherine, on specifically what do you see YWCA's role in this? One is to highlight it. And you're just on mute. I'm just going to unmute you if we can.
Yeah. There's, sorry about that mute button. There's many ways. I mean, reducing barriers to entry, and that even goes back to the childcare component that we talk about. Everything goes back to childcare, it really does. So helping there, starting young in schools, and I know there is work being done in schools, but it's not focused enough in our ability. And as the 4 YWs, it's something we can advocate for. We can help bring folks together. We're excellent collaborators. We're able to look out into the community and bring folks together and fix big issues. And that's one where I know the work's being done, but it's not focused enough. It doesn't look down the road, and it doesn't bring the right folks together right now. It's excellent work, but we can do so much more. And I'm so glad we flagged it to the government as one of those long-term aspirational goals, and to help build a better Alberta. Because in 50 years, what will we look like? And if we start that work today, it's exciting. And if we can have a role in bringing folks together to get it done, we want to be at the table.
And there's so many gender stereotypes around these subject matters, right? That do lead and pave the way to higher paying work. And I think we as the 4 YWs just have a really strong voice to play on that and tackle that head on. I'm going to shift gears again. Well, you mentioned it though, Catherine, back to childcare, but Shannon, and when we made this recommendation on childcare, certainly starting with a task force, but are we thinking, and this is a question from Bontu, are we thinking about universal childcare subsidies? Do we think that's a possibility in this province?
I feel like it's not only a possibility, but in my opinion, I feel like we need to go towards something like that. We know that a lot of frontline workers are women. We know that a lot of them are essential services right now. And like you mentioned earlier, Jan, they're trying to be the teacher at home when they go home, doing frontline work, and then trying to arrange childcare. Especially if you look at right now, if you look at COVID regulations and trying to have social distancing and having all the procedures and processes in place. In order to do that, childcare will have to serve less kids at a time. They won't be able to support as many to follow that, as well as there's PPE and other cleaning requirements that are in place, which all of those things increase the cost of childcare. So I believe in order for us to move forward, I believe we have to have some sort of subsidy in order to even allow a woman to be able to even move to the next level. And part of that as well is we know that it's very difficult to come off of different other subsidies. If there's not a transition to come to the workforce at an entry level or a different level, it'll be very difficult to actually attain that. Additionally, if there aren't subsidies for childcare related to being able to support a woman going back to school and get training and education, there really is a glass ceiling that can't be met simply because we're working with mothers. And I think that's very unfortunate that we have to address the source of need. And I don't think that that can be done without subsidy.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sue, I know you've got a lens on this as well, because, we've looked at this in the context of our own childcare in Calgary, and subsidy versus, right, how do we make it affordable, and how challenging that is, because also childcare is not, it's an expensive, and it needs to be expensive given what it's doing, because it's also about early childhood development. But curious about what you would like to kind of comment on that.
Well, picking up on that, I'm thinking as everybody's speaking, it's not just about more childcare as well, right? So I think there is a cautionary measure there about it's just bringing on more, and that will be sufficient. It is coming back again to what I had said before, which is around flexibility. There's a changing workforce out there. I mean, as a result of all this, there are parents who might want childcare more from 8 till 1 and not need a full day anymore. And you have models out there that, you have childcares that are set up on that financial model. So we're going to need to address that if we're going to make those allowances. And picking up from Catherine's point around education, what does that mean around affordability and flexibility? And I think, most importantly, it is about child development and youth development. And that's a pride point for me with YWs. That has always been our approach. As Catherine said, it's not babysitting. It's not. I mean, our teachers here, even when COVID came and everybody had to go home, our teachers here were doing videos every day to send to the kids, because the kids had formed relationships with their teachers. So you talk about trauma, you're suddenly at home and your favorite teacher that you look forward to going to see every day, that has an impact. And so I was particularly proud of our team there to keep connected that way and understand that those relationships, that development is all part of what we're trying to achieve here with the youth that we serve, and parents count on that. So it really is that entire package around quality. And what does that mean? And again, making sure that there is a voice at the table that sees that real time. And again, you have a collaborative of YWs that not only have a lens in terms of government and what we would advise, we're actually on the ground and we're seeing it and we know what happens. And so we are a great pipeline for what we're witnessing. And I think as things unfold over the next year, post-COVID and whatever, a second wave, and then you add in an economy that's going to continue to be a challenge, we're going to need that real-time back and forth on what we're seeing so that we are able to meet women and their families where they're at and be able to provide those services.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. It speaks to, I've got a couple of questions from Kathleen. And when we talk about the value of the sector, and which also goes to, I think, our 6th recommendation on really needing supports, right, from the Premier's Council on Charity and Civil Society. I'm sure I don't have that name right. Nazreen is going to kick me when she gives me feedback afterward, but the council that they've created, but how we keep, right, this sector really strong, just given the complexity we're feeling. But Catherine, I'm going to go back to you on, with the recession in Alberta, how does the YWCA show the economic impact of social services? And she, in particular, is curious about sort of the net return on investment. And I always like to say the net return on impact as well.
Net return on impact, that's a great way to put it. Well, and that's a great question to be thinking about right now, because we know that money is in very short supply, but demand is doing this. So all of, that collaboration that we talked about earlier is even more key now, because we can't, the way that we did it pre-COVID is not going to work post-COVID. There is just not the money there, and we need governments to know that we all recognize this. So, but how do we as a sector come together? So that collaboration, I know, for example, the YWCA is working with Impact, which is a group that's really working on domestic violence prevention. So how do we bring together these forces that are already in our community, and how do we, as an organization that's been in the community since 1907, really understands those gaps? How do we, as leaders within the not-for-profit sector in our province, help lead the way and show folks about, it's not always dollars, because it's just not there. And we have to be very pragmatic about that. How do we then be creative and innovative and help make sure that we still are providing those services to folks? So it's not a simple, there's no simple solution, but that's why, again, flagging it and showing not just the government, but our community, that these are very real issues that are going to be facing our community as we emerge from this crisis. The demand for mental health supports, I mean, we provide counseling services at the Y in Edmonton. The demand has just skyrocketed. So how do we emerge from this being able to still help our community, heal our community, but in a way that's innovative, creative, and understanding that the dollars are not going to be the same and aren't going to be for a long time.
Yeah. Huge challenge, right? The need is never greater, but it's again, right? And I think it speaks to the collaboration and why we're also pulling our resources together, both our kind of intellectual knowledge in terms of also our organizational resources to tackle this together, because we know we've got to drive the efficiencies so that the dollars can go further. And I too come from a corporate background, but in my in and outs, right, in the not-for-profit sector, it is amazing the efficiencies and how we can actually get the most bang out of those dollars. And so as we continue to do that, but let's be clear, it's not about shortchanging this work and what's so really critical, because resources are needed. I want to get really real too in terms of the people that we serve. Shannon, I'm going to put this question to you from Shauna. I'm sorry, it was Kathleen. So this month is both Pride Month and Indigenous History Month. And so how do we ensure that the COVID-19 economic recovery does not leave these women behind? And I know you're facing this particularly in your community.
Absolutely, and it's really important that we look at that. So in Lethbridge, we're facing a lot of social needs right now within our community as a whole. And part of that does include the LGBTQ2S community, as well as specifically Indigenous women in our community and men as well. We have to do work across the board through COVID. We see a lot of racialized women facing consequences of COVID that maybe not felt by other people. And so we're finding that also in our domestic violence shelter, as we see people come in. The demographics have shifted a little bit from what they were before. And a lot of that is because there's a lack of supports and access to supports. So what I think we can do to support integration into a normal, what we call pre-COVID normal society, I think it's important that we navigate and advocate for the women that we support. In terms of focusing on history, I think it's important as well. We can still bring about different things. We've done some work within our local area to partner together with local Indigenous agencies, as well as bringing forth the art and different things like that within our building, just to try to represent, even though we're limited in being able to go out and about, we're trying to bring those pieces in. In terms of the LGBTQ community and Pride, we're doing some work as well as far as signage. I feel like we are missing an opportunity. Pride is very important, and it's often a time of being able to come together. And so I think we need to do some work to come up with something that's going to be community appropriate, that we can still do within COVID, and even not having Canada Day celebrations, which go hand in hand. It seems like our Pride is really close to that. How do we make something that works? And so I think we need to look at something we do, not just with technology, but also whether it's still doing a parade or some type of a show of support. And so we'll be doing that locally. And I think we can still support in what we have and help keep people from feeling isolated. I think the toughest thing right now, and we're hearing this from the province and from AHS, is that isolation is causing so much of a negative detriment to mental health. And I feel like these are two opportunities to actually lift and raise people up in a positive way. So I think we need to take advantage of the month and the opportunity, no matter what that looks like.
Yeah, thank you. And it reminded me of just a previous comment that was made in this, in this session today, right, too, about making sure that these voices are heard. And so we are, just committed to doing that and listening, and right. So because understanding that many of us may not know actually what needs to look different. So how are we actually going right to the source, right? And how do we actually give them voice in actually helping to create these policies and these recommendations? That's certainly our commitment. I know that is. Whitney has cast a question, and back to childcare. And we know fundamentally, huge barrier, right, to women not participating in the economy, but she actually puts a very good lens on it. So thank you for this great question, Whitney. And I'm going to paraphrase it here, but she is wondering about, it's one thing, right, in terms of families needing childcare. Let's talk about the childcare worker, who generally is very undercompensated. And we're seeing that also right now in this particular time. And how do we sort of help with that work-life balance at the and Whitney's going as being as bold say, and often at the expense of women of color who are in these roles. So how do we make sure that childcare is well compensated? Who wants to take that one? I'm going to get one of our CEOs to put up their hand. Sue, jump in.
Well, and you know, this fits nicely with our third recommendation around top-ups for frontline employees and shedding a light on the realities of you know, the people that we count, the women we count on at all times, much less during a COVID. And helping to understand, and I guess how do we ensure, I mean, you know, you think about it, these are people who are taking care of our children every day. I mean, it's a bit heartbreaking when you realize that they are not well compensated for that, and that as a society we're just okay with that. Like there's something, you know, if we're going to learn something from COVID, it's that we're a bit out of whack here on what we pay for people who are so integral to our families and who deserve to be able to make a living from that. And so we have to pay attention to that. And I think that how do we do that? We shed more light on it. And again, you know, you look at this group here, I call, you know, we're one really big brain. It's the echo chamber that we create by saying that over and over again and making sure that people really understand who we're talking about and what it takes for them, what their lives are like, and what they are not being compensated, and really start to question and be provocative. And it's our job as leaders of the YWs and as the YW movement to you know, to shed a light on that so that people understand what's going on. And so I think for us it's really that echo chamber and being relentless. And my last piece I'll say about that is our role. And particularly, as you've seen, this is a passionate group of CEOs who feel that way. And it is what we should be doing, and where we should be spending our time is to bring voice to this and to have that voice of reason. And Jan will get a kick out of this because I always say, and by the way, we are overhead. Right? The CEOs, like you talk about getting into the whole, what is your overhead? We are nothing but overhead. But, you know, we need to do this work. We can't just be providing a service. We have to be able to advocate and be able to work collaboratively with government to make better and better decisions.
Yeah. No, and you remind me, because I often talk about, right? And this is, these 4 organizations are uniquely positioned in this province to work from that advocacy piece, right? Changing the high level, the policy, the framework, the system, but grounded by the grassroots. And how do we sort of bring that together to get real social change? And we do that always in partnership and collaboration. And certainly our submission to the provincial government is very much in this spirit. We want to be partners, right? We're at the table. We want to help you figure this out. We absolutely understand, right, how complicated this is. And but let's be informed by our experiences. Shannon and I had alluded to earlier when we were doing introductions, because even as I reflected on the 6 recommendations, one of the strange ones actually still, I thought, and I want to bring everybody into this conversation. Why are we talking about more municipal funding? Why would we be advocating for that?
So I feel like, and specific in some of our Albertan cities, some of the municipalities are the funder for some federal and provincial dollars. And so with those, there are 7 cities within Alberta that are funded for the homeless serving system dollars, as well as the Reaching Home federal dollars, for an example. FCSS dollars often go through municipalities as the funding source. And the reason that's been done collectively by the federal and local governments, even as we saw COVID dollars distributed, it was done from the province and federal government through a more local, hands-on, in-touch approach. And so in order for us to actually understand the needs and the gaps in each of our small communities, we have to look at the municipality. The municipality not only has, if they're able to, even if they're not the source of where it's coming from, it needs to be integrated in a way such that there isn't duplication. If we have the federal government funding something that the provincial government is, that the local government is, that we also have entrepreneurial supports for, then what are we going, that's not a good efficient use of the resources. And it seems to be in terms of governing bodies and government, the municipalities are the closest to the ground to what the needs are of people. And they're also mostly influenced in a more hands-on way by voters, and that makes a difference. When they're the ones that have to act and respond to their local districts in a way, people look to the city. I know I worked for the city of Lethbridge, and I will tell you that whenever there's an issue, the mayor is responsible and the city of Lethbridge is responsible, and I fielded those calls. And really, that's the way our people in our cities see it. The city's ultimately responsible for the well-being of their people. And so by collaborating with the municipality, provincial, and federal governments, along with other resources, I think we can best map out how to support each area and avoid duplication, make sure there aren't gaps and misses that we have in our communities. And I think it is imperative to work together. We talk about partnership and collaboration. That needs to come on both ends, not only the service delivery, but also the input piece.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, right? It just makes sense. We've got a question from John, and Catherine, I'm going to actually give this one to you. And it's something we had talked about actually a couple of days ago, right? Certainly when you read the submission, it's about kind of intentions and task force, but John Lilly want to know, what concrete action steps do we propose to help women and families post-COVID?
What concrete action steps? Well, a lot of these are, the childcare one I think is, we keep going back to it, but I think that's why we put it at the top of the list, because without that sector remaining healthy and viable, particularly post-COVID, we are going to have the ripple effect across our entire province will be felt. And that concerns me, because if you don't have that affordable, safe, quality childcare options, I'm really worried about the fact that, women who want to get back to work, or families that, want to get back to work, will have to make decisions about that they're not happy, putting their children in places they're not feeling great about. And that's a problem, because that's not how you build a healthy and strong society. You need it, the whole sector, the whole system working perfectly. And I'll talk to, John is a big advocate when it comes to preventing domestic violence and gender-based violence. And we have a proposal in here about the communications around shining a very bright light on a very dark topic about gender-based violence. We know that in crises like a pandemic, we're seeing around the world that those rates are increasing. And even post the crisis, we're concerned with the economic strain on families, that those numbers are going to continue to go up. So as a society, governments, we need to understand what the prevention that can go into making sure that we confront those issues as a community, but also the supports that are available, so people understand what they can access. Because post-COVID, we're going to be dealing with these rising mental health issues, the strains on families, and without a community that actually acknowledges you have an issue, you really won't be able to have solutions that help anyone. So those are two, but again, all of these recommendations, I think post-COVID will help in the very long term, make sure that we come out of this stronger and more successful as a province.
Yeah. And Matt actually has a question that builds on this theme, and I'm going to throw it to you, Sue, in that as the province continues to reopen, we've seen decisions and steps that tend to favor men resuming their traditional. How would you like to see men support YWCA's recommendations and women overall in recovery?
Well, I think there's a moment for pause. So how could men better help is I think everybody would have had a unique experience from the first couple of months of COVID, right? We just got to see everything differently. I say to people, I've never seen more dads out with their kids riding bikes than I did during COVID, which is fantastic. And if you talk to fathers, they're like, wow, I never knew that this is what really goes on during the day. And so I think that there is an opportunity to have some conversations, and maybe YWs could do that, on what are the observations of men that they've had during COVID, what have they learned around what we're up against, and how do we ensure that what they've maybe benefited from in terms of engaging with their families or with the community differently is not lost, and that actually is part of a new way forward. We talk a lot about this, with the YWs, is that it's not about going back to normal or even a new normal. It's going to be different any way we look at it. And so I think it's particularly in Calgary, it's with the oil and gas sector and how that's been decimated. It can be easy to look at it as affecting more men than women. And really, my request would be for anyone considering how we rebuild Alberta and our economy is to really think about it through a woman's lens. How would this decision affect women? And so when you talk about concrete ways of doing that, then you have to have women at the table. And you have to have that in a way that there is a strong voice at the table and the courage to say, okay, I hear you. However, here's another side on how I see it. It's not a right or wrong. It's just, here is the women's lens of how this is taking place. And the only way to do that is to have both at the table, having the conversations and learning from each other.
Yeah, and how powerful, right? Even stating that lens from a male perspective, right? Presenting actually, right, the female lens and acknowledging it, honoring it, and encouraging it. It's something we've really come to appreciate in our work. And while I know we talk a lot about that this is the YW, it is not exclusive. We all also in our programming serve men, women, and children. And this is about us building a stronger society and a stronger community in all of our local communities. I know we're getting near to the end here. God, it's gone fast. But Shannon and Sean, I have not been ignoring your question because I just thought it was a great finale question. Is that we've got 54 people on this call, and Shauna's question is, what actions can we take, like I can take listening to this, to support this work in this task force? Shannon, do you want to bring it home for us?
I will try my best. So I feel like that each individual in Alberta, part of it is to look at the points that we're making as the YWCAs collectively. All of us have a voice to some level, and we all have a circle of impact. So I feel like what each person can do is take away each of these points and advocate, speak on whatever platform you have to whomever you speak to. I'm bringing up childcare. I'm bringing up how important it is to have gender diversity within the STEM jobs. And supporting women at tables, whether you're male or female or any gender, you can support the cause and the standpoint and viewpoint of women. And I think that is the long-term goal here. I think we also need to always consider, just like what Sue was saying, we need to look at the overall impact in the woman's perspective in every matter. So I think coming out of this and what we're going forward at a minimum, I think it raises the thought and the question and the flag in our minds of what is the woman's perspective? How do we always make sure that's at the forefront? And I think we all have an obligation in our communities of keeping that in mind. It's very, very important. If we can also look, each of us and our local governments, provincial and federal, and start to do some looking and mapping in our heads of what are the gaps, where are we missing, and then look at our local resources, municipalities. We look at point 4 and how we actually do that. It's actually going to be to each of us responsible for identifying and bringing forward gaps and identifying and bringing forward solutions. We need to encourage partnership. When it comes with an opportunity to communicate in a way that promotes Alberta and safety and inclusion, again, that's another point that's going to take intentional communication, intentional awareness. This is a start, but it's going to take ongoing work to get to where we need to be. It's not an option not to have safety and inclusion as part of our local everyday lives, but it's going to take a concerted, purposeful effort. And so I think overall, through all of this, what we can take away is having a purposeful, concentrated effort with an intent of safety, women forward, women's perspective, and also inclusion. And I think the biggest thing we can take away and what we can do is intention. And that's how I would wrap that up.
Thank you for that. Our time is drawing to a close, and I know both Sue and Catherine probably also have others to comment, but maybe we can just say ditto at this point. But because I think we could be here for at least another hour, right? As we just sort of warm up here. And I think to those that have joined us, thank you again for joining us. I'm going to pass it back to Nesreen to close off, but I hope I did not disappoint when I said that I was going to introduce you to, in this case, 3 forces of nature. And just thank you all for just your authentic and just for driving this change forward. Over to you, Nesreen.
Thank you, Jan. On behalf of YWCA Edmonton staff and board of directors, I would like to send a warm thank you to Shannon Hansen, Catherine O'Neill, and Sue Tomney. We miss you, Connie, and thank you as well for participating on our panel today. Each of us are part of an ecosystem, and that is individual and collective. Like the YWCAs, we stand together in making a better world and expressing our individual views on how we might do this together. Thanks also to our moderator, Jan Demery. Very well done. And lastly, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your support. Please stay in touch. Help us continue our mission of building a stronger, safer, and equitable community for everyone. Head to our respective websites or social media channels for more information on how you can get involved or donate. The next Power Lunch series is Tuesday, June 23rd. The guest speaker is on theme, YWCA Canada CEO Maya Roy. She will be talking about the importance of feminist approach to a stronger COVID-19 response. You won't want to miss it. See you then. Have a great afternoon and goodbye.